Moving on to test number 3, passage 1, numbers 1 to 11. Studies have shown that employees are happier, healthier, and more productive when they work in an environment in which temperatures are carefully controlled. So we look at the original. Everything looks pretty good in the original. We've got, even though it may not look it at first, these are actually parallel. We have happier, right? Employees are happier, healthier, and more productive. Reason why we have to do more productive is that productiver is not a word. So we need to use more productive as the comparative form of that adjective, productive. So everything looks pretty good in the original, so I think we're going to keep it. Let's just double check the rest. Notice in B we switch healthier to healthy, and that's not good. We need that to be healthier, just like it's happier. In C, we break the parallelism by adding in the they are, which is unnecessary. And then in D, we add being, which, if you recall, is almost always wrong. And in this case, it is, again, because it breaks the parallelism. So we can get rid of D. The answer is going to be A. Which choice provides the most appropriate introduction to the passage? So we're actually going to come back to this one because we need to read what's going on in the passage as a whole before we can do this. So this is more of a general question. So we're going to come back and tackle this one when we have read more of the passage. So, well, let's read on and we'll try number 3 next. New buildings may be designed with these studies in mind, but many older buildings were not, resulting in spaces that often depend primarily on artificial lighting. While employers may balk at the expense of reconfiguring such buildings to increase the amount of natural light, the investment has been shown to be well worth it in the long run for both employees and employers. For one thing, lack of exposure to natural light has a significant impact on employees' health. A study conducted in 2013 by Northwestern University in Chicago showed that inadequate natural light could result in eye strain, headaches, and fatigue, as well as interference with the body's circadian rhythms. Circadian rhythms, which are controlled by the body's biological clocks, influence body temperature, hormone release, cycles of sleep and wakefulness, and other bodily functions. So here we want to potentially add this sentence. Workers in offices with windows sleep an average of 46 minutes more per night than workers in offices with windows. So should we add this here? Well, we don't really say anything here specific about sleep and with how much more they're sleeping versus not sleeping. We do mention fatigue, but this just seems still out of place, even though it is kind of tangentially related and it is a benefit of having this natural light, which seems to be kind of what's going on here. We haven't even, number 1, defined what circadian rhythms are. That comes next. So to put something in between this word circadian rhythms and its definition doesn't seem to make sense. But this just doesn't seem to be, in the right place. It doesn't seem on topic for this particular point in the passage. So we're going to say no. Yes, because it supplies quantitative data that will be examined in the rest of the paragraph. Just skimming ahead, we see that this is not going to be examined in the rest of the paragraph. Yes, because it explains the nature of the bodily functions referred to in the next sentence. No, the next sentence itself describes the nature of the bodily function. So for that reason, we can get rid of the yeses. No, because it interrupts the discussion of circadian rhythms. Exactly. Goes right in between the word and its definition. No, because it does not take into account whether workers were exposed to sunlight outside the office. Totally irrelevant, totally minor point, not the major issue. So that's why we're going to go with choice C. Next question. Circadian rhythms, which are controlled by the body's biological clocks. So this needs to be possessive because the bodies are possessing biological clocks. So for that reason, we're going to get rid of A. B, C, and D are all possessive, but notice in B we add a random apostrophe to the end of clocks, which is not really necessary given that biological clocks aren't possessing anything themselves. And in fact, that gets rid of B and D for us right away. So all we're left with is C. Bodies is singular, which seems to be okay. We're talking about the general body. We're not talking about bodies, plural. So we're okay with the singular bodies, possessive. Biological clocks, no random apostrophes, making it plural or possessive or anything like that. So we are happy with choice C. Number 5. Influence body temperature, hormone release, cycles of sleep and wakefulness, and other bodily functions. Disruptions of circadian rhythms have been linked to sleep disorders, diabetes, depression, and bipolar disorder. Like any other health problems, these ailments can increase employee absenteeism, which in turn is costly for employers. So we have a verb here. We look at the choices. We might have some sort of subject-verb agreement issue going on. So let's see what the subject of this is. So what is it that is costly for employers? Well, what it is the employee absenteeism, because the employee absenteeism, which in turn is costly for employers, since the which is referring to the absenteeism and the is the subject of which, therefore is by connection is the subject of employee absenteeism, which is singular. So we're actually okay with having a singular verb here, even though I do admit it sounds a bit weird. So we can get rid of D and B because they are plural. Is being, again, being is almost always wrong. Here it just adds unnecessary wordiness, so we can get rid of C. So we're happy with choice A. Employees who feel less than 100% and are sleep deprived are also less prone to work at their maximal productivity. One company in California gained a huge boost in its employees' morale when it moved from an artificially lit distribution facility to one with natural illumination. Which choice best supports the statement made in the previous sentence? So the previous sentence talks about employees who feel less than 100% and are sleep deprived don't work at their maximal productivity, whereas sentence 6C talks about morale. We're talking about productivity, not morale. So even though, this is a benefit of moving to natural illumination, it's not the benefit discussed in the previous sentence, which is about productivity, right? That's what the question wants. So we can get rid of A. B mentions productivity and a 5% increase in it, which looks good. C is about saving costs, which is not good. D is about investing time and capital, which is not relevant to productivity. So the only one that has to do with productivity, which has to do with the previous sentence, is B. So the answer to this one is B. Artificial light sources are also costly, aside from lowering worker productivity. They typically constitute anywhere from 25 to 50% of a building's energy use. When a plant in Seattle, Washington was redesigned for more natural light, the company was able to enjoy annual electricity cost reductions of $500,000 each year. So let's look at 7. Which choice best combines these sentences? Aside from lowering worker productivity, artificial light sources are also costly, typically constituting anywhere from 25 to 50% of a building's energy use. Seems pretty good. I mean, this opening modifier describes what the artificial light does. It lowers productivity. The sentences are put together without wordiness or redundancy, so A is looking pretty solid. The cost of artificial light sources, aside from lowering worker productivity, typically constitutes anywhere from 25 to 50% of a building's energy use. So this is problematic because the original says that the artificial light sources are what constitute 25 to 50% of a building's energy use. Here they're saying that the cost of these light sources constitutes anywhere from 25 to 50% of a building's energy use. Big difference. We'd also say the subject here really shouldn't be the cost, it's the artificial light sources. Again, this modifier is talking about what the cost does. The cost of artificial light sources is not what lowers worker productivity. It's the artificial light sources that do. So here it's the wrong subject. We need this to be, as we can see in A, the artificial light sources. Typically constituting 25 to 50% of a building's energy use, artificial light sources lower worker productivity and are costly. So that one's not terrible, I guess, because the modifier is right. It is rather short. But I would say this is a little bit awkward, this attachment of and are costly. That doesn't show that it's kind of a side idea. Notice the core of the sentence should connect the fact that this 25 to 50% of energy use is costly. When you put it here, it almost seems like a side note, kind of an additional piece of information. Whereas in A, notice we're connecting the fact that artificial light sources are costly because they typically represent 25 to 50% of a building's energy use. So C is close, and it's got some merit to it, but it's not as good as A. How about D? Artificial lights, which lower worker productivity and are costly, typically constitute anywhere from 25 to 50% of a building's energy use. Again, we don't have the connection in D that we need, which shows that these lights are costly because they use 25 to 50% of a building's energy used. So we can get rid of D and C for the same reason. B we get rid of because the subject should be the lights, not the cost. The only one that does everything we need is A. Number 8. When a plant in Seattle, Washington was redesigned for more natural light, the company was able to enjoy annual electricity cost reductions of $500,000 each year. Notice we have the word annual already in the sentence, and then we have each year. So this is a classic case. We actually saw something directly like this in the lecture videos. This is redundant. Since we've already mentioned it's annual, we don't need the each year. So we can just delete it. A, B, and C are all redundant. So the only good choice here is choice D. All right, number 9. Among the possibilities to reconfigure a building's lighting is the installation of full pane windows to allow the greatest degree of sunlight to reach office interiors. Thus, businesses can install light tubes. These are pipes placed in workplace roofs to capture and funnel sunlight down into a building's interior. So this connection, this opening word is thus, but the question is this showing some sort of conclusion of a particular course of reasoning? And we don't see that here. This is just giving the possibilities to reconfigure a building's lighting. So one possibility is full pane windows. Another possibility are light tubes. These are two different possibilities that can be used to achieve this goal. So thus, which shows conclusion, is not going to work. Finally, which shows kind of an order or a sequence of events. Again, doesn't make sense given that we're talking about the examples here of this kind of these possibilities. Nevertheless, shows a kind of contrast, which we don't want, but alternatively shows that this is another example, right? Another way to do this, an alternate way to improve the building's lighting is to use these light tubes. So that's why C is the best option. Number 10, thus businesses can install light tubes. These are pipes placed in workplace roofs to capture and funnel sunlight down into a building's interior. In the original, we've got a comma splice, two complete sentences separated with just a comma. So A is gone, B is gone. D is awful because, again, we've got the word being. It makes it wordy and just vague. Best choice here is C. Notice in C, we're using this relative clause to connect this definition with these light tubes. So the sentence reads, alternatively, businesses can install light tubes, which are pipes placed in workplace roofs to blah, blah, blah. So C, this relative clause, use of the relative pronoun, works really well to connect these two sentences together. And when we use this, we only need a comma because we're connecting a independent clause or an independent clause to a dependent clause. So this one is choice C. Number 11. Glass walls and dividers can also be used to replace solid walls as a means through distributing natural light more freely. So this is an idiom question. You don't say a means through something, you say a means of doing something. A means of is another way of saying like a way or a method of doing something. So we don't want the original, we don't want from. Deleting it's not going to work either because then it reads as a means distributing natural light. We need the of there. So this is your classic kind of idiom question, and the only one that works based on standard usage is B. Let's return now to number 2. Now that we've read the whole thing, which choice provides the most appropriate introduction to the passage? Studies have shown that employees are happier, healthier, and more productive when they work in an environment in which temperatures are carefully controlled. Now, the passage said really nothing about temperature. The most important thing this passage discusses is the value of light. And particularly natural light. So that looks good for choice B. That is thoroughly sealed to prevent energy loss. I don't think employees care about that, and that's not the topic of the passage anyway. In which they feel comfortable asking managers for special accommodations. Way too broad. We want the one about light since that's the topic of the passage. So yeah, once we read the whole passage, this one isn't that bad at all. And we get choice B.